Well, hello out there. Hi. How is everybody doing out there? Welcome, welcome, welcome. I think I'm on now. My name is Daniel, and I'm really happy to be talking today about endings, the end game, nailing your story's finale. Before I do that, though, I would like to explain who it is you're talking to and where I come from. I come from a land called Autocrit. Autocrit is a home for authors. We have our fully functional writer's desk, which is a whole suite of tools to help you plan and perfect and polish your writing from start to finish. Throughout that process, we have a whole online community of fellow authors, and we have an academy side where we do one-on-one instruction and workshops and courses to help authors become their best selves. And so this is a little bit of a taste to that of that today. I thought we could dive into endings and give you a little bit of a preview of our endings workshop that we have coming up. So consider this a little peek behind the scenes, look under the hood, so to speak. So endings. Endings are challenging, aren't they? For a lot of authors, just the idea of endings make them nervous. They are concerned. Am I going to stick the landing? We can all speak to works that, the endings just made the whole work fall apart. They didn't, it didn't get cross that finish line. I was there, I was excited, I was glued to the page, and then the author didn't pay off their plot. They didn't pay off the characters. And before you beat yourself up over this or act like this is a unique problem to yourself, keep in mind that industry professionals suffer with endings. There's a reason why they tend to test screen movies, for example. One of the biggest things that can change are endings. Now, in the case of The Lion King, it didn't get quite to the point of test screenings, from what I understand, but originally, when they were storyboarding it, they originally had Simba actually kill Scar. Like, he actually was responsible for the death of Scar. But the writers decided, you know what, that's a little bit too same. Like, we don't want to morally equivocate Simba and Scar. We want them to be very different. And so now in the current version, as you are aware, Simba kicks Scar off of the Pride Rock. Scar tries to attack him, and then he falls. And then the hyenas are ultimately the way that Scar meets his demise. And so it's a bit of a problem of his own making. Simba doesn't have to get his hands dirty. Titanic, that James Cameron masterpiece, one of the most successful movies of all time, had a very different ending originally, with a weird standoff with Rose and the necklace. You can find it on the DVD features. It was weird. It kind of turned what was a beautiful romantic tragedy into a bit of a kind of an action set piece at the end. Not a great idea. James Cameron, of course, was smart enough to realize that, and he ditched it. Even something like Get Out won the Oscar for Best Screenplay. Originally, the author wanted a much darker ending to the movie. Now, maybe you haven't seen it, so I won't spoil it. It's a pretty old movie, but just in case. But originally, the main character was going to meet a very unfortunate end to the story. And what the author found out was, well, the audience wasn't geared up for that. They really didn't want a situation where, after everything this person had gone through, that they ended up in a tragic outcome. It might have been realistic, and for the social satire the writer was doing, it made sense, but it just wasn't landing. And so the author very cleverly figured out a way to keep the social satire, but switch it to a much more optimistic ending. And if you know the ending of the movie, you might be able to tell exactly what occurred. And to be honest, I used to work at a movie theater, and the ending of Get Out is one of the best audience reactions to an ending I've ever seen. So it just goes to show that you can have a well-informed ending. You can feel like all your ducks in a row, and then you put it out there, and you got to adjust it. So don't panic. This is a normal part of the process, and don't be surprised if beta readers come back with this sort of negative reaction. But what you're really trying to avoid is that outrage. It wasn't the ending I was expecting. It wasn't the ending that you earned. Uh, Again, you did not pay off the promises that you made to the readers. And of course, the danger of this is, well, this is where one-star reviews can come from. This is where people don't want to read your next book. It's a dangerous thing, and I don't want to like completely panic you because of course there are solutions. Now, in order to find out what makes a good ending, I kind of want to flip it around because sometimes it's easier to know how to do things well if you can identify how to do things poorly and simply avoid that. So, what makes a bad ending? Why do we hate some endings? What about endings create a problem with the audience? So let's take a look at that, shall we? Non sequiturs. Yes. What if your ending has nothing to do with the rest of your work? Or it doesn't feel like it naturally flows? Well, that's not going to be a satisfier. It doesn't matter how cool the ending is, if it just comes out of nowhere. Well, you're going to feel it's contrived, it's not earned, it wasn't what I signed up for. I'm going to be disappointed, etc., etc. Deus machinas, right? Basically, those are the same kind of things as a an unearned ending, right? Um, and you have that. It's literally the hand of the gods, right? A huge paranormal force comes in and swoops and saves the day, and this can extend to anything that wasn't pre-established that seems to solve too many problems. Fair enough, right? So that can be a major issue for sure. What if it does wrap up and it makes logical sense and all of that, but it just kind of feels pointless? How does that happen? Well, you can do the things, you can, it's like character is trying to accomplish goal. Do they get to the goal? Yes. So therefore what, right? If we don't land the what the impact it was to their life, if we don't land the what the impact was to society around them. If we don't do any of those things, then essentially we just told a story where character wanted to set off to accomplish X thing, they accomplished X thing, and who cares, right? No, you definitely don't want to do that. You can also, of course, just not answer the question. You could say, is the character going to get to the goal? And your answer could be, you'll have to find out next week, in which case you have a cliffhanger. That could be a rather unsatisfying ending. Or it could be, well, do we really care about that goal? Or is it about the friends we made along the way or something like that? In other words, it's sort of a non sequitur, but particularly it's a non sequitur where you aren't actually answering the question that the audience was expecting you to answer in the first place. And so they have all this unresolved tension, all these unresolved plots, and they're wondering what's going to happen. And another problem you can have is you just don't surprise in any manner. Now, this is going to vary a little bit by genre. Certainly, we don't read a romance and assume there's a possibility that they're not going to have a happily ever after or a happily for now, because that's an audience expectation. But that doesn't mean you can't have surprises, because how that happens should be full of, or not maybe full, but should at least have some surprises, right? There should be some things maybe we didn't see coming. If everything is exactly as we predicted, well, we're going to think that we're about as clever and creative as the author. And isn't your goal as an author to give people a creative experience, something they didn't quite anticipate, paying off things more than what they would have wanted? Yeah, et cetera, et cetera. And you can also have just an emotionally vacant ending. This is kind of with the pointless, right? It's like, all right, you do the things, everything is accomplished, but it doesn't hit you in the gut. And maybe not even emotionally vacant, but emotionally less than. Doesn't have that, strong, poignant kind of ending, right? Missing that. Certainly, we can feel all of these problems as we write our endings. I'm going to go back here and look at some of the challenges that you said that you have when writing endings here. So you say making sure the ending answers any open questions. So yeah, that gets back to lack of resolution, makes sense of the story, and a Deus Machina, of course, right? Biggest challenge for you is to wrap up character arcs and not end up on a wimpy note. Yeah, so that's kind of that emotionally vacant, right? You don't want to end up limp. You want the characters to be strong. Now, tragic endings exist, and we'll certainly discuss that. I won't have time on this live stream, but it would be part of the workshop if you are gearing towards a tragic ending, for sure. And yes, this is another question. Here we have Catherine from our Autocrit team, right? Just letting go. How do you know when you're finished? The classic line for that is art is never finished, only abandoned, right? And so you just have to give it up at some point. Absolutely. You have good endings, just problems getting readers to them. Well, that speaks to the promises you're making along the way. So if you feel really confident about your ending and you're worried that the audience is not getting to it, I do wonder if you might be falling into a little bit of either a non sequitur or Deus Machina or something. Because if we know how amazing that ending is going to be, like if we're gearing up towards it, it shouldn't be too hard to get the audience towards it. You could be just holding back too much, too many twists, too many I don't want to say surprises, but too many developments that we don't know about. And so therefore the ending maybe kind of does sort of come out of the blue. Maybe it's not like it doesn't make any logical sense, but there would have been, if there's not a big way that somebody could have at all guessed or even surmised what might happen, perhaps that might be why. So something to look at for sure. So when we think about great endings, well, I'm going to have some fun with this and I'm going to do a little acronym. I love to do acronyms in my little workshops. Grape endings is what I'm going to do. I know it's fun. So instead of great endings, we're going to do a grape ending. And the reason why is so I can have a nice little acronym. So what we will be discussing in the workshop, I'll have a little bit of time to show you a preview of today, is growth, resolution, attitude, pit, and emotional. And I know those words may be a bit abstract. So let me put some meat on those bones. So, growth, of course, we want the character to have change throughout the story because that's the why. That's the why you're telling the story. Let me tell you a fantastic story about my life. See, the other day I needed to go to the grocery store and get some milk. And so I went to the door and it was jammed. And then I pulled really hard and I got through. And then I got to my car and I went to the grocery store and it was really crowded and it was really annoying. But I got the milk. I talked to the cashier and you know what? My card didn't work. So I called the bank and they got it sorted out. I got the milk. I got home. Now I have my milk. The question is okay, why are you telling me all of this? I mean, these are all kind of annoying inconveniences, right? Did you change? Did you learn anything? Did you grow as a person? No, not really, right? And so it's not very compelling. If the story is something crazy happened to me, like I was, I was in the grocery store and somebody held it up and I had to like hide out and I had to go through this experience. And now, whenever I go to the grocery store, I'm triggered that something bad might happen. Okay, that's a very big, like, whoa, that escalated quickly. But the point is that changed me as a person. That's the kind of story that's generally worth telling, particularly in a novel form, right? If we're talking about a short story, maybe not so much, but even then, what did doing all of that to get to the milk mean for that person, right? And then resolution. We talked about this already, but you want to have your story wrap up. You've got to wrap up those loose ends. You've got to uh, figure out what your plot threads are actually doing. Like, why did you set all these mysteries up? Are you going to pay them off? Sometimes the solution is to set up less if you don't have an answer for a lot of these things. But you do want to consider that. When it comes to attitude, you want to ask yourself, what is the attitude that you want the audience to leave with? We often begin our story with a certain attitude. This is a story that's going to make you feel happy. This is a story that's going to scare you out of your mind, right? How do you end? There's a reason why horror stories often don't completely resolve in the same way. Speaking to kind of your mileage may vary on genre, and it is worth having those discussions. And one reason why we have, these live sessions is because that way people with different genres can ask the question and be like, okay, yeah, but in my genre, yeah, yeah. So in horror, you don't resolve as much. And one of the reasons why is because not resolving is scary, right? Lack of resolution is intimidating and creepy. You want a certain amount, but you don't necessarily bundle everything up in a nice little bow in a horror. It's like the monster is still out there. We don't really know what happened. what's going to happen next, right? And that gets to the attitude, because we're leaving the attitude with of the audience of fear and uncertainty and discomfort. Right? That's the goal of horror. Now, if this was romance, we don't want them to have discomfort at the end, right? We want them to feel comfort. We want them to feel, love and affection and things like that. So again, that's the attitude we want to leave with. It's very dangerous if you start your audience one direction and then by the end of it, you've completely pulled them into another. Now, there's something to be said about stories that begin a little happier and get a little darker and things like that, or vice versa. But you do want to be really cautious, because this is definitely a way to create that kind of non sequitur, where did that come from ending that wasn't earned. And sometimes it can be an outright betrayal. People will absolutely hate you for it, right? Pit. Getting to the pit is, what did the character actually need to do to make the ending happen? Did you actually beat up your character enough? Did you put them through the ringer enough? Was the conflict strong enough? If we're going to have that stand on the mountaintop, yeah, moment, and let's be honest, the stand on the mountaintop moment doesn't have to be, fighting the Dark Lord. It can be standing up to your relative. It can be overcoming an addiction, or all kinds of things, right? But the question is did you push your character to the limit for the specific conflict involved in your story, so that you do have that, wow, they went through it. Bam, that's an ending, right? Keep that in mind. And then emotional, did you actually write it to where the emotions are on the page? Or did you just kind of go through did you just kind of go through it, right? Did you just go through the motions? Because it's easy when you get towards the end, let's be honest, I just want to get done. I just want to write it. Like, I just want to say the end. And you know what? I am not going to begrudge you that one bit. It is fine. If your ending is not well written the first time you write it, well, guess what? Most of your first draft's probably not that well written with the first time you write it. However, you do want to keep in mind that when you write your ending, you're often towards the end of your first draft. I know some people write out of order, but you're often at the end of your first draft, and yeah, you're a little bit exhausted. You're a little bit tired. You don't quite you don't quite know how to feel about things, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, don't beat yourself up about that, but make sure you have dramatized on the page. People often say show, don't tell. Around here at Autocrit, we like to say dramatize, don't summarize, which I think is a better way of phrasing that. And yes, you want that drama on the page. What have I heard, Tim? You know, Tim and I go round and round. He's a member who's always on, and we like to go back and forth. The end can still be part of our garbage drafts and fixed in post. Exactly. Catherine affectionately calls her first drafts her garbage drafts, which I think is a little bit rough on herself, but fair enough. Whatever you have to frame it as, right? It doesn't matter how good it is. It exists. Yay. How do you carve an elephant out of a block of granite? Well, you get a block of granite and you carve everything out of it that doesn't look like an elephant. Easy peasy, right? Yeah, But the idea is that, yes, now you got your block of granite. Now carve everything out of it that doesn't look like an elephant, right? But you got your block of granite until you got that first draft. You don't even have the block of granite. So let's get that granite going. And I'm going to completely run that metaphor into the ground. All right, let's talk about growth. What changed for the main character, right? Let's go into detail about this. And for all of you out there who have taken any of my workshops, you know what's coming next. Oh, you can feel it. You know it. There it is. Look at that. This is my favorite slide. This is my go-to. It's a drinking game with me. But the reason why is because it is so important that you get this right. This is like the number one thing. If there's one thing you can learn from this live stream, it's this. So pay attention. Okay, gotcha. Status, love, meaning. There is a central thing that is guiding your main character. That is their motivation. Yeah, see, drink. There we go. No, it is, though. It's their motivation, right? Now, people are motivated by multiple things at times. I get it. But you need to know what failure looks like in your book. What would failure look like for your main character? And it usually, nearly always, falls into one of these three categories. Status, love, or meaning. Now, some people phrase this as money, sex, and God, but I like to draw it a little bit more abstract because I think it makes it more usable for a wider variety of works. So, for example, wealth or status, things like social rank or financial decisions. If you're ultimately your character's goal is, I want to be the CEO of the year, or I want to be the gold medalist of the Olympics. That would be a status or wealth question, right? I want to make sure I get so much money. I want to be recognized as, this level of achievement, that sort of thing. It's a tangible way to measure your own success. All right. You'll see a lot of stories that do this. The other one that you'll see a lot of stories do is love. Any sort of relationship. Aha, so somebody's giving me a good comeback. I love this. In horror, isn't it survival? I would call that a status. I just want to be alive as a status. Yep. So you could say that's not as lofty of a goal as wanting to be the CEO of the year, but I want to be alive is a status. Yeah. Um, because being alive is not necessarily your number one goal in life. You could say, well, of course it is. No, love could be higher than that. Will you sacrifice yourself for the one you love? There we go. So it could be acquiring a relationship or maintaining a relationship. Now, this can be any kind of relationship. It doesn't have to be romantic. It could be like an owner and their pet, friends, things like that, right? This is a lot of stories as well. Any friendship story, love story, pet story, anything like that. Even in action movies, it could be like, well, what's ultimately motivating them? They want to save the one they love, right? That's the ultimate failure or not kind of situation going on. The last one is the most difficult to write and is the one where you see the least amount of stories, and that is meaning. Meaning, well, I guess I shouldn't say the least amount of stories. It depends on the genre, because this is an intellectual pursuit or an attempt to better oneself. So if this you're in the mystery genre, often it is a meaning story. It's an intellectual pursuit. Who did this? Right? How did they do it? Why did they do it? How, something like that. Sure. Or it's, I want to figure out something about myself and accomplish it, which means you sort of have to come up with an externalized status sort of answer to that so it's tangible, but it's different than being acknowledged by the world. So the status is like, the world acknowledges me as whatever, the best in the world. This would be more like the King's Speech, where it's like, I need to overcome my fear of public speaking enough to function in my role in society or something like that. I don't have to be recognized as the best public speaker in the world or anything like that. I just got to get through of it. So this is a really good, I love these comebacks. Keep them coming. I'm worried that following these guidelines will result in making your work too stereotypical. No, because the reason why it won't is because this is just speaking to basic human desires. You can literally put any story and just ask, if the character didn't accomplish X, would it be considered a tragedy? Would it be considered a failure? It works for literally anything, right? So when you say stereotypical, there are stereotypical forms of these that maybe you would want to avoid. So, for example, you could say status or wealth, acquiring a treasure. That's a pretty obvious one, right? Love. Yeah, I really want this specific person to fall in love with me. And there are stereotypical relationships like hate to love or things like that. Yeah, fair enough, right? Meaning you could say, a mystery plot. Who did this is pretty stereotypical. So there are like you could say the easiest, the most common versions of this. But on the other hand, this is so basic, right? This is so high level satellite view. This is not going to be that special secret sauce that makes you stand out. This is what makes you identifiable as what makes your protagonist identifiable as a human being. It's what makes them identifiable as a character where I can track yes or no. If you can't track yes or no, now we'll think of it this way. Imagine you're a career counselor, right? And a student comes in and they're like, I want to matter to the world. And you say, okay, so, how are you going to go about that? And they're like, well, I don't know. I just want to matter. It's very difficult to understand, like, kind of what to do to help that person. You generally want to narrow it down to something. And what you'll start to do is you'll start to ask them questions. What are you very good at? Well, maybe you should pursue that. Maybe you can have achievements in this regard. It's the same kind of thing, right? But until you get there, you just have this protagonist that's just kind of floating around, and it could be very hard for an audience to like capture that. Now, I understand there are some genres like literary fiction and things like that, that kind of the whole goal in life is to be as unstructured as possible and very wispy and all of that. Yeah, fair enough. Those are harder to make into like a true page turner because it's going to be all about how well you can write, you know, basic things. And if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But the vast majority of people, even people who write quote unquote literary fiction, often have a character with a trackable goal. Because again, it's just a way for us to keep track of what's going on and for us to be invested into things as well. Where would a benevolent desire to better the world fall? Like, what is Luke Skywalker's motivation? Um, Luke Skywalker ultimately wants to bring down the Empire. So I guess you could ask yourself, is that a status thing or is that a meaning thing? I would say it's more of a meaning thing because it's not, I want to be recognized as the most important person in the bringing down of the empire. It's, I want to restore order to the galaxy, right? And so, how do we know that he's successful? Well, he's successful because the empire is ultimately defeated. And you can tell that Star Wars is very much a meaning story because so much of the conflict is about meaning, right? It's about the light and the dark and ethics and morality and things like that, right? It's not just a military strategic story. There is some military strategy involved, but that's not really what it is. It's not how can we outwit the opponent? How can we do this? No, no, no. It's a deep quest to better oneself, right? Um, all right, let's move on. But no, I love the questions. Whenever you get into art, right, you start giving kind of guidelines, and then there's legitimate pushback of, well, I'm an artist. I don't really want guidelines. I don't want to think about it on this kind of analytical level. It's sort of like, do you want the magic trick to just exist, or do you want to know how the magic is done? And to some degree, there's going to be a your mileage may vary on some of this. But knowing how the magic trick is done doesn't necessarily take away the magic. I mean, sometimes it makes you more impressed in the magic because you see the work involved. So just keep that in mind. All right. Now, you might be asking, is the character's need the same as the character's want? Not necessarily, right? Just because they're driven towards a certain goal and we're tracking it and we're like, are they going to get it or are they not? Doesn't mean it's what's right for them at all. In fact, there's plenty of wonderful stories where we know what the character is motivated for is something that would be terrible for them, and we actually don't want them to get it. And so that's part of the drama of it. It's like dramatic irony where we know more than the characters. We know more what would be well suited for them than they do. And so we are interested to find out when they're going to find out. What is the major obstacle between what they need and themselves? And that's where you get into the big antagonistic force. And these are the main building blocks of what's going to make a solid ending. What do they need to do to overcome the obstacle is the growth. If they could overcome the obstacle at the beginning of the story, it's not an obstacle, it's just a nuisance, right? If I tell a story about me wanting to go to the grocery store to get some more milk, and I'm like, my door was locked, I can go ahead and open it with my key. Well, that's not really an obstacle. That's just an inconvenience, right? It's not even that much of an inconvenience. No, no, no. What would be more of an obstacle would be like my car isn't starting. Well, I go on YouTube and I find out how to fix my car, and then I fix it and I go on. And now what's changed? I now have the knowledge of how to fix my car, right? And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for why couldn't the character accomplish what they could at the end of the story at the beginning of the story, so that something changed as a result of the story, which is why we're talking about it in the first place. And we need to make sure we indicate to the audience what that was at the end of the story so they can understand what the purpose of the whole thing was, right? It's all pretty logical there. How do we know the difference between a need and a want? Well, what a character needs, if they don't have it, they are in a tragic, miserable existence, whereas a want, not necessarily, right? If somebody wants to be, let's imagine you have a story, they want to be a famous singer. That's what they want. And then throughout the story, you realize that actually the process that it would take for them to become a famous singer would change who they are enough as a person. They would have to, whatever, not spend as much time with their family, or they'd have to make moral sacrifices, or whatever it is your story is going to make them do, right? And then they decide, actually, I just want acceptance from, I just really want a relationship. I just really want to feel fulfilled, uh, and I can get that another way, right? And so, that's a common tale, right? It's a common tale that people don't really know what they need in life. They just have a something they think they need, and actually it's what they want, but then they have to switch. So, yep. All right, so when we have our core characters, you have our main character, your protagonist, the antagonist, which is the big obstacle between them and their want. The relationship character is the character that helps the main character realize what it is they need to do to change. So often they're the mentor, the Obi-Wan Kenobi or whatever, but they don't have to be that dramatic. They can just be the bartender that the other person is able to rub ideas off of and have an aha moment. Again, the point is that they weren't smart enough to completely come up with it on their own. They needed the world, they needed pressure, they needed tension in order to pull it out of them so they could have a growth. And then you have the distraction character that is a representation of the wrong way of going about things. I cover this more in depth at other times. But yes, when I think of GRAPE endings, right? Growth, resolution, attitude, pit, emotional. I only had time today for growth. If you'd like to check out resolution, attitude, pit, emotional, I cover them in depth in our endgame workshop, which is currently available. You can get it through autocrit.com. And I know some of you are already on our all access pass, so you'll be joining me for that. Of course, we also have our workshop pass, which is less than the cost of a single pass, and that gets you all the workshops for a month. It's a pretty crazy deal. Like right now in September, we have 5 workshops going on. So foreshadowing, endgame, unmasking mystery, plot craft, fight scenes, sports romance. You get all of that for the price of a single workshop, which means each of them are very inexpensive. You're talking about, a couple of drinks at Starbucks, and you're covering these. The nice thing about the workshops is not only do I go through the points bit by bit like I did here, but we have time for interaction. I can look at samples. We have conversations about things. It's a load of fun. I know some of you on here. Yay! I know some of you on here are in our workshops often, and really it's only because of all of you that I can do what I love, which is talk about writing. So I always appreciate that. For those of you who are also Autocrit Pro members, remember Autocrit's a whole website with the writer's desk and pro membership. We have events coming all the time in the near future. Just to remind you, we have a wonderful horror club coming up with a special guest. We have Pitch It, where you can pitch your book or your story to some of our Autocrit experts, and they will let you know things you could adjust about your pitch to make a better pitch if you were pitching it to an agent or something like that. And the Accountability Club, which is the best way for you to start off your week. Join our group, do a live write-in, and find out where everybody's projects are. By the way, this is the link if you want to join us in that workshop. But I am not going to just wrap it up right here. I do want to open up the floor for any questions about particularly what I covered today. Please like and subscribe this live stream. We're going to continue to do these live sessions, these live information sessions, and we even have an upcoming web series, I know, next week. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But for those of you who have been harassing me about certain projects, I think you're going to really like that web series. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. It's going to be very vulnerable and raw, and all the things the kiddos like on the internet these days. No, it's going to be a lot of fun. But anyway, any any questions? You're like, what? I know I just kind of mic dropped you on that, but you know what? You got to tune in next week, and you're going to find out more about that. That's all I got to say. That's another thing I do. Big tease here. It's what I like to do. Where do you check out the monthly bundle? If you go to this website and you go to the checkout, you will see it. It'll be the workshop pass option. That's the how to write endings workshop. Just go to the order now, and you'll see it there on the form. You're welcome. All right. Well, I don't see any questions coming in. I hope that I'm not missing any from any of our different. I know I'm on a few different few different places right now. And this is new. We usually just broadcast on YouTube. So if I'm missing any comments in any other venues, I apologize. But definitely, yeah, see you at the ending workshop. Absolutely. And I'll see you around Autocrit. Again, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, do all of the things so that we can bring you more and more of these live streams and all of that. Uh, Susie had a question. Oh, here we go. I have a symbolic object at the end of my book. Should you have the main POV character say specifically what the item represents? This is a wonderful question. Unfortunately, without seeing the specific work, I can't just give you a definitive answer of yes or no. Because to some degree, this is a who's the audience for this book, right? Because, if this was a younger audience, not to be rude, but sometimes you're like, okay, symbolism, are they really going to get it? Do I need to spell it out a little bit more, right? Also, how you wrote about it. Like, do you need to spell it out more? I often will lean towards no because, the director of Finding Nemo pointed this out, understand, and he's like, audiences like 2 plus 2. They don't like 2 plus 2 equals 4 as much. That doesn't engage them as much, right? Let them do the math. You do them 2 plus 2, they're going to fill in 4 for you. And isn't that a more intellectually stimulating experience? Isn't that better for the audience? So, yeah, often when you have a character being like, and this is the symbol of whatever, it does feel ham fisted, right? It feels a little condescending. But it does vary. It doesn't always have to be that coy. So I don't want to just definitively say no, but I will say if it's a work geared towards adults, my general thought is to be on the side of no. This, of course, is also a question that you can leave to your beta readers because you can let them look at it and then you can ask them, well, did you get it? What do you think this symbolizes, right? And see whether or not they got it. That's another way you can handle it. And then you can ask yourself, well, how much do you care if everybody gets it? Some people don't. It's a little bit extra for some people, et cetera, et cetera. Are there ways to make an ending that leaves the end open for a sequel? Yeah, absolutely. Of course there is. The question with something like that is how to avoid a cliffhanger serial type ending, because there is a difference between a series and a serial. I know I'm getting into like lingo here, but a serial is literally a story that's being told in volumes, and it's like until you get to the end you don't really have a complete story. A series tends to be a series of complete stories that just nest into each other to form a larger story. So, you can think of the difference of a television show like 24, very much a serial, right? And then on the flip side of that would be a television show like Law and Order, which is vaguely a series, right? It's so episodic. You do have recurring characters, but like you can watch it in any what order and who cares for the most part because every episode is so self-contained. And so that's kind of the spectrum, right? Now, in terms of endings, if you're writing an episodic show, of course, your ending is completely buttoned up. If you're writing a serial show, your ending isn't buttoned up at all. But usually you're somewhat more in the middle. Now, how do you make the middle work? What I would say is the best way is to create a story question for that specific volume that can be solved. But the implications create bigger questions that aren't solved. And so, therefore, you can feel the satisfaction of getting that specific book question, but there are bigger things to concern yourself. But it really depends on the kind of series, right? Because you're saying a sequel. You can open the room for a sequel by doing a completely closed story like Law and Order. People want to watch next week's episode because they like the writing, they like the characters, They like the tone, right? So it doesn't have to beckon a bigger question in order to be worthwhile to have sequels, like Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, etc., right? However, often you do leave open-ended questions because when you're talking about a series, a lot of people are thinking more like the Harry Potter route, where yeah, every book has a question that is answered. Sorcerer's Stone, that's answered. What is the Sorcerer's Stone? Where is the Sorcerer's Stone? What do you do with the Sorcerer's Stone? What's not solved is the Dark Lord is still out there, right? Chamber of Secrets. What is the Chamber of Secrets? We go in there, all that, all of that is settled, but there's a bigger problem. So that's often where you land. It's kind of in the middle, if that makes sense. Great questions. All right. Well, I will see you around the Autocrit sphere. Thank you so much for joining me yet again. And I hope to see a lot of you in our upcoming workshops or on some upcoming live streams. So see you around, everybody.